I'm pleased to be joined by David Pollak, New York State Director of the Obama for America presidential campaign. Previously, Dave served as a co-chair of the New York State Democratic Party. He's held several senior positions in the financial services industry. Welcome to CityWide.
Good to be here, Ken. How are you?
Who's going to win New York?
Oh, Barack Obama is going to win New York.
But the race seems to have tightened recently.
Not in New York. I think if you look at it, John Kerry won the state by 19 points. Al Gore won the state by 25 points. Every time New Yorkers have had an opportunity to vote on the policies of the Bush administrations, they've given it a big thumbs down. And when people find out that John McCain is really just promising 4 more years of George Bush's failed policies, you're going to see New York strongly in the Democratic column.
The polls at the moment, and it's volatile, as volatile as the stock market, seem to indicate that since the convention, the race has at least gotten closer in New York than, where Obama's lead is down to single digits.
Well, that's not accurate at all. The one poll that came out has Obama up 5 in New York now. That same polling company had him up 8 prior to the convention, so it changed from 8 to 5 within the margin of error. I mean, I don't want to get too technical about polling results, but it's hardly a suggestion that the race has tightened.
So what is it about the Obama policies compared to the McCain policies that matter to New Yorkers?
Well, I think New York is like much of the country. People are worried about the economy. We know about the manufacturing job losses that have happened throughout the state. They've been critical to a lot of the problems that the state is feeling. Now you see the job losses on Wall Street affecting some of the white-collar people. People are nervous about the economy. You talk about what's happening overseas with Iraq. Obviously, a lot of the issue menu out there for folks is really frightening. And so people are looking for a change in direction. They want something new. And when they're faced with Barack Obama, who's presenting a lot of new ideas and an agenda for change, versus John McCain, who's voted with George Bush 90% of the time, I think that you'll see New Yorkers act like much of the voters in this country and give a resounding yes to Barack Obama and a rejection of another term of George Bush.
The McCain folks would argue that Obama's tax policies are particularly bad for New York City because of the large percentage of high-income wage earners, high-income entrepreneurs in New York. Is that a fair characterization?
Totally not. The Republicans had 8 years almost control of the country, right? They didn't cut a single program. Their tax policy was cut taxes and borrow the money instead. Ultimately, upper income people in New York are the ones who are going to bear the cost of that larger debt. So to say that, hey, we're going to cut your taxes, but we're going to borrow the money, tossing the burden onto your children and grandchildren, is not something that benefits taxpayers in New York or anywhere else.
I was struck by the message of the Republican convention that celebrated small town sensibilities and seemed to denigrate urban values. And, I think that, David Patterson had it right. I know that the Republicans hit back at him that some of the comments that came out of the Republican convention in talking about urban areas were a code word for black. Am I overstating the case that the social values of the Republican convention were really contrary to what the majority of New Yorkers feel?
Well, if you look at the polling numbers, one thing that's inarguable across the country, almost without regards to the poll, is that the economy is the #1 issue. It's the #1 issue in urban areas. It's the #1 issue in rural areas. Americans are united in this fear of what's happening with the economy, what's the next stage in globalization, what's going on with all these manufacturing job losses, the failed housing market, on and on and on. So to try and split up tactically, as the Republicans have done, and make this an urban versus rural race, I think ultimately will be unsuccessful.
We had Ed Cox, your counterpart for the McCain campaign, on recently, and he argued that John McCain's highest priorities were national security and the economy / taxes close behind, and that the social value issues, choice, gay rights, some of the other family values type issues that have been prominent in political campaigns just weren't that important to the McCain agenda. On the other hand, the vice presidential candidate that McCain selected seemed to have been selected largely because she appealed to the Republican base on those very issues.
Well, yeah, the Republicans right now are facing a problem in that they're failing in the enthusiasm gap. Democrats and independents are really enthusiastic after 8 years of George Bush. George Bush is at a historically low popularity rating. People want change. Everyone's out there saying change, 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 change. So McCain has to try and catch up in this enthusiasm race. So he had to pick someone who would throw red meat to the wolves of the Republican right, as they say. And I think while that may, in the short term, have gotten the Republicans' attention, it's not a successful way to sell the message of change to American voters who know that they're going to need stewards at the helm who not only have experience, but who have a vision for a different type of America, moving away from the failed policies of the last 8 years.
So we have a situation now where the last two presidents both made important picks politically in their vice president. Al Gore gave Bill Clinton a certain gravitas. They were the same demographic, but they had different backgrounds and experience. One could say the same thing about George Bush, that whatever you think about Dick Cheney and his performance as vice president, that he reassured the country about this inexperienced Texas governor being able to operate.
Oops, I guess we were wrong about that one.
Yeah, on the national stage. But, you know, do you think that voters care about the choices that the presidential candidates make? And do you think that Cox made the argument to us that John McCain doesn't need anybody to supplement his experience, and that would suggest to me that his view of Palin's role in a McCain White House may be different than Obama's view of Biden's role in an Obama White House?
Well, I can't really speak to the Republican side of that or what they thought that would shore up or not shore up. I can tell you that, A, I don't think that a vice presidential pick has ever really determined who's going to become president in modern times. But I will tell you that that Barack Obama wanted a partner in the White House, someone who brought an extensive amount of experience to the table, someone who would be an extra voice at the table, because, as you know, to be president of the United States and the issues that you have to face in the world, they come at you, they're constantly changing. What the past suggests isn't always a good guide for the future. So to bring someone like Joe Biden on, who has that type of experience, who's negotiated with foreign leaders, who's stared down dictators across the table, is an important ally and another voice at the table to help lead. I'll leave it up to voters to decide whether or not Sarah Palin can play that role for John McCain.
A lot of the Obama campaign discussion about national security issues has been pointing out the failure of the Bush administration in terms of the conception and execution of the war in Iraq and the war on terror, and also the Bush doctrine of unilateralism, of America striking and striking first if necessary, and striking alone if necessary, compared to a multilateral type of approach. The McCain campaign John McCain is articulating a slightly different approach from Bush, which is saying, you know, I looked Putin in the eye and I thought he was a KGB thug. But is it the same? Is it a more sophisticated version of Bush's doctrine? And is there any reason to believe that Obama would be successful in meeting some of the deep challenges that we have from Venezuela, from Iran, from Russia, you know, given the fact that these are dangerous times for America?
Well, I don't think anyone can, with a straight face, really look at me and say that John McCain has been saying how he's going to be different than George Bush on foreign policy. Quite the opposite. And it's not only how he's running this campaign, it's how he's behaved when he was a member of the Senate. He voted with George Bush 90% of the time. So let me just say, so when you talk about one of the major foreign policy challenges facing us, the fact that America has lost its standing in the global community, the fact that we have the way we went after the war in Iraq and how we did it, and ignoring even our closest allies. I mean, we're talking about people like Canada and Mexico, right? We're not just talking about countries that may seem very far away. This loss of American credibility doesn't allow us to successfully win the war on terror in a world where borders are shrinking, as 9/11 has shown us. What you've seen Barack Obama talk about is the need to re-engage the world, to put America back at the forefront of leadership, to bring the world community together to fight these problems as a community. I don't hear that from John McCain, and thus I don't know how his foreign policy and war on terror can possibly be successful.
But McCain says, look, I told the president we needed to send more troops to Iraq. I told him it would have a major impact. We could turn the tide. He sent more troops to Iraq. The tide has turned. I understand in a very systematic way the kind of strategic decisions that you have to make to defend the United States.
But this is nonsensical, right? No one ever questioned, even the most left-wing liberal person never questioned that the American military could go into Iraq and beat the Iraqi army, and no one would question that if you spend a lot more money and put a lot more lives at risk and put American soldiers on every street corner in Iraq, you're going to dampen, in the short term, violence. What it doesn't do is suggest a long-term strategy for how we're going to turn over stability to that region. All the surge says is, yeah, if you throw more troops in there and keep the troublemakers hidden in their houses, they're going to be hidden in their houses and waiting till the troops are gone. It doesn't suggest a new strategy for success or how to have this country and the area of the region stand alone as a partner with the United States and the other free nations of the world, providing a safe world for people to live and conduct business in. All it is just putting more cops on the street to fight the criminals. It is not a recipe for success, nor is it a change in policy from George Bush.
We're going to continue this rather interesting conversation right after this.
Big dreams and good grades aren't enough to get into college. There are actual steps you need to take. Finding someone who can help is the first and most important. For the next steps, go to knowhowtogo.org.
Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with David Pollak, New York State Director of the Obama for America presidential campaign. We talked a little bit earlier about the enthusiasm of the campaign, and I think that one of the most remarkable things about the Obama campaign has been the way it has engaged people using new methods for doing that, tapping into new sources of contributions and voters. In some ways, if the Bush campaigns access the evangelical Christians in a way and made them political in a way that they hadn't been before, Obama seems to have tapped into another group. Perhaps it's the netroots, and that's a term maybe you can explain, because I know that you're very familiar with it. But there seems to be something happening out there with the Obama campaign and the way people participate in politics. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. One of the very interesting and exciting changes that's happened that the internet has brought is it's allowed more people to participate in our democracy. People can log on our campaign website, BarackObama.com, and they can volunteer, they can organize their friends, they can post events, they can start their own groups, they can run their own phone banks. Pretty soon I hear people are going to be able to do their own robocalls. And what this does is people who used to have to come to the Democratic Party or come to the campaign and wait online to participate through the regular structure now can actually engage in political action on their own. So someone like Barack Obama, who attracts new people, young people, first-time voters, people of color, people who've been at the margin, people who've thought they haven't been inspired by politics, can come now and through a lot of these web tools, the so-called netroots, get their friends involved, bowlers for Obama, and all these different groups that spring up. And it's very exciting, and it gets a lot of new energy, which sort of feeds on itself, because everyone who goes online, starts their own group, creates their own little mini campaign on behalf of Barack Obama, then can have other people join those sites.
But the Democratic Party has a long history of cornering the market on non-voters, of investing in college organizing efforts, and then the young people don't actually come out to vote, or going after marginalized voters who then, they may be loyal voters, but they're not voters in large number. Is there any evidence that it's different this time?
Sure, and you hit on the very important point about one of the revolutionary aspects of the netroots. Previously, if the Democratic Party wanted to communicate with someone, they had to beam a TV commercial into their house, or they had to call someone on the phone or use a robocall. Basically, we're reaching out, targeting people, talking to them. With netroot participation, it's people coming to us. There's a self-selective aspect to it. Someone who logs on to BarackObama.com, opens up their own profile, sends out an email inviting their friends, puts their pictures and creates a little social networking page around Barack Obama, starts their own phone bank. This, by definition, is someone who is engaged and a voter who's creating civic action on their own, rather than passively sitting back waiting for someone to beam a TV commercial into their house.
Is the ability to participate, is the synopsis of everything into the single word of change. Is that more important than the specific positions of the candidates?
But in this particular election, the notion of change is real. It's not just a word. The last 8 years will probably go down as the worst presidential administration in American history, and we know already analytically as the least popular. So when people talk about change, they want something different. And so when they talk about change, it is the a key word, if you will, for all these other issues that people are worried about, whether it's the economy, whether it's jobs, whether it's the housing market, whether it's education and healthcare. So rather than someone saying, hey, I don't like Bush's position on jobs, I don't like his position on the environment and Social Security and healthcare and education and national security, they just say, I want change. I don't like the way things are going. I want something different. And my desire for change, that's the motivating action, right? It's motivating. Apathy leads you to lack of activity. Desire for change drives you towards activity. That's what's driving people in the tens of thousands in New York to our website to get engaged on their own.
Where does New York stand in the Obama political food chain? We are a state that you suggest is going to be in the Obama column. There's not a lot of campaign going on in terms of targeted commercials for New York. We pick up some of the national stuff. And of course, I would hesitate to say the elephant in the room, but our junior senator from New York was the rival for the nomination. Hillary Clinton is a transformative figure in her own right with a strong constituency in New York. So is New York important to Obama politically? Where are we going to stand if he's in the White House?
Well, first of all, let me say our top priority in New York is generate a lot of heat, light, activity, take advantage of all these people, the tens of thousands of people in New York who are visiting BarackObama.com and getting involved. We want to have there be record turnout for Senator Obama in New York. We want to make sure that his message of change not only is communicated at the presidential level, but affects all the other targeted races down the ballot. There's key congressional races in New York, which could have a big impact on our congressional delegation. There's key swing state Senate seats, which could change for the first time since World War II, the makeup of the state Senate in New York. But states like New York and Utah for the Republicans bear this burden of perennially not being in play. So a lot of what people, once we've taken care of our campaign here at home, we look to send people to the battleground states. In the southern part of the state, we go to Pennsylvania. In the western tier, we're sending people to Ohio. In the North Country, we're going to New Hampshire. So we're both generating heat, light, action here in New York, but we're also using the strength of New York as a solidly blue state to help nearby battleground states.
You had some previous experience in kind of grassroots organizing. You started a group of young professionals who wanted to get into politics, and I guess when they knocked on the clubhouse door, it's not that they weren't allowed in, it's that there was nobody home. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. In 1992, when we founded this group called Democratic Leadership for the 21st Century, DL21C, we corresponded with three things. One, Bill Clinton got elected, and there was a record turnout of people in their 20s, which we were at that time. Two, email was on people's desks for the first time. And three, after the losses in the years right after that, after the losses of David Dinkins in New York City and Mario Cuomo statewide, there was room for new energy and new activity to come in. So we, in the early 90s, started this group using online organizing, and I think we were at the forefront of this movement, as I talked about before, that's had an incredible democratizing impact on politics, and one I think will improve our political system as we move into 21st century candidacies, 21st century campaigns, of which Barack Obama is the first.
So I think both campaigns talk a lot about reform, about gridlock in Washington, about the cesspool of politics, and about the undue influence of lobbyists. But is there really a reform movement in New York Democratic politics anymore?
Well, first of all, I can't let that go. I don't know how John McCain could be a reform element when he is the darling of the lobbyists. And not only has he been the lobbyist's favorite senator, but they're all working on running his campaign.
But some people would suggest the McCain-Feingold was reform.
I guess if you allow people to give more money to the system, then that might be called reform in some corners. But all it does is allow people with more money to give even more to the system. But in New York, obviously, there is a reform movement. You look at a new generation of politicians coming in. David Paterson is the governor. Malcolm Smith in the state Senate. The people looking to run for mayor in 2009, city controller. The people in their 30s and 40s. It's a new generation of leadership.
But does new generation necessarily mean reform, or does this mean different?
I think it does. Different sometimes means reform, and politics goes through cycles. And you have young, new, fresh faces like a Barack Obama nationally, like a David Paterson here in New York. It necessarily brings a new element, a new perspective, a new vision. This is no longer people who grew up in the 60s. These are people now that grew up, they're the post-60s generation. They are the first generation of 21st century politics. They grew up with the internet and color TV and remote control and computers, and that's necessarily going to have a very different impact on our political process, but also our governing and policy process.
What do you think is the one issue that separates the candidates specifically for New York City? In other words, national policy, Iraq, taxes in the macro sense, healthcare, all of those arguably affect all Americans, and to one degree to another. But if there was one set of issues or one specific approach that really made a difference for a New York voter looking to make up their mind, who was focused on what it meant for New York, what do you think that would be?
Well, I think you're exactly right. It's all those things, and for the New York voter, it's even more acute. Right? New Yorkers are worried about the economy. Upstate, job losses have been happening for 15 or 20 years. When my grandfather came to Buffalo, New York in the 30s, they said, if you can't get a job in Buffalo, you can't get a job. Well, now look at the economic dislocation they've had up there. And we thought that Wall Street was going to be the economic engine for New York State coming out of New York City for the rest of our lives. Look at now, Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, AIG. Previously unthought of, and Bear Stearns a couple months ago, it was unthinkable that these companies could have gone out of business. So for us in New York, the notion of going a different direction, change in the economy, change in healthcare, change in education, change in the environment. The environment's going to affect New York. What happens if the seas rise? What are we going to do in New York City? Remember, New York City's an island, and Brooklyn and Bronx, and I'm sorry, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island are all on islands.
We can't just drill a drain, baby?
No, that's not going to be possible. So the change message is even more important for New Yorkers than it is for all Americans who, at the end of the day, are equally concerned about change.
My thanks to David Pollak, New York State Director of the Obama for America Presidential Campaign. I'm Ken Fisher. Thank you for joining us on this edition of CityWide.